This is the next interview for my audio essay that I'm going to be doing. The title of it is "The Importance of Role Models and Representation: Redefining Gender Through Personality Appropriation." So again, the way this goes is going to be it's going to be disclosed on the description. And here I have my next guest. Please give us your name, full name, the gender you identify with, and your age.
So my name is Patrick. I go by he, him, his pronouns, and I'm 24 years old.
Okay. So we're going to be discussing, like I told you, we're going to be discussing representation and role models. So we're going to be starting with the educational spectrum. And we're going to be opening with a little bit of explanation on what role models are. A role model is an individual which one projects onto them what they want to be better at. So it can be moral skills or even something physical, like I want to be a better person or whatnot. So a role model is a way to project what they want from them and appropriate it into their personality, right? So bringing that into an educational system, would there be an importance in the lessons one would learn from the role models? What can children learn from them?
I think that with children and role models, a lot of it is through just like the people who are put in your life, so you don't have a lot of like agency over that. So often it's like teachers or like people who lead clubs and things like that. And I feel like it's always generally in like a teaching setting, especially with children, because like you're often being put in situations to learn various like life skills. And so I feel like it's like your role models are very often in education, like people who you're kind of like put under and you don't have control over it necessarily, but it's just like finding common interests and like learning from them and a willingness to learn as a child, like whatever skill this person is like chosen to teach you, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah.
Like if it's like swimming or dance lessons or something like that, or if it's like a teacher in like an institution like public school or whatever.
Okay.
So like generally like the relationship is like a set, like it's a preset, like you've agreed to teach this child the alphabet, or you've agreed to teach this child how to swim, or that. So I feel like generally it's like that's kind of what we glean as children from role models.
So children learn from these role models. They learn how to act in society, basically.
Yeah, like you're kind of taught like through imitation, I guess. Generally.
Well, yeah, that's generally what they say, and that's actually what Judith Butler also mentions, right? You did read Judith. You remember Judith Butler, yes. Right? So in her performative essay, she says that gender and sexuality are defined by performative acts repeated and taken from history. So basically, gender and sexuality is constructed through what's historically facts, and it keeps changing as time goes, right? So, being that as it is, do you think the introduction of more representation and the freedom to follow any role model in a school environment would help a child define what gender is for them?
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely a more contemporary thing where there's like acceptance of children who express gender in different binaries rather than just like male or female. And I feel like kind of media that's around that, like it's easily accessible. So like now there's like a video on Facebook that circulates about like a kid who chooses to go by like pronouns that are maybe different from like male, female, or go by pronouns that maybe oppose like their birth gender. And I feel like that is something that's like becoming more acceptable, but it's still in like a phase where it's like maybe tokenized, or it's like taken advantage of through media, maybe, where there's like examples of just like children like wearing like something that isn't assigned to their gender, and like being like tokenized for it on the internet and just made into like kind of like a meme or like a poster child. So I feel like there's like positive and also negative of like positives being that it's more accessible and it's more okay for children to express gender and or maybe not sexuality, but just like gender, and eventually sexuality with age, in different ways. But also at the same time, like there's damage being done in like the ways that like you're kind of exposing like a lot of adult ideas on children.
That's interesting. So you're saying it's we should be mindful of.
I just think it's a lot of responsibility to put on a child, to like be a poster person for like gender expression.
Well, yeah, that is true. That's with children, but what about the adults that help an individual's education, like a teacher, a principal, whatnot? How do they guide and affect what role models they follow, and how do they help them define their gender? Do you think?
I think a lot of gender is a really strange thing because it's like there is so much like binary, like so much of the world just still operates in very like male-female roles, and so like the existence of like a queer presence or like a non-binary presence in like instructors is something that is very foreign to me. Yeah, like I feel like a non-binary presence in like instructors is something that's like is hard for me to imagine or understand.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that was the last part of the education spectrum. It feels like it's going really quick, but by previous experience, I can tell you this is usually the part that's like a breeze to them. They're like, okay, yeah, whatever, education. Mm-hmm. Now we're getting into the part where it gets a little bit intense. Yeah, politics. Okay, politics. So, moving on to politics. With the recent rise of political strains and fascist thought in the United States, again, not naming names, okay? We all know who I'm talking about. How important is it now to, like, remember Audre Lorde? Mm-hmm. Like she says in her Master of the Master Tools essay. Mm-hmm. She says that how important would it be to change the thought of divide and conquer to that of define and empower? Basically, how important is to how important would you think is to protest and to make xenophobic government realize that difference is not weakness but strength, and is looking for more representation, a way to do this?
I think that representation is always important in politics and in like government systems, just because the more diversity you have within your like political structure, the more likely they are to be able to find compromises and find solutions for like larger like diversities of population. So I think that it's always like diversity is something to strive for in every like leadership system, and I think that it's often something that's overlooked or like purposely ignored. And I feel like that's part of like systems at play, which I feel like plays into the master's tools of like the systems that are set up to promote people who already exist and just like bring in more people that already kind of control. Like the like white man like kind of like running things and like bringing in other white men to aid kind of like trope, I guess. Yeah, I feel like representation is always something that's like important and necessary, because as like a political system, their job is to lead and like find solutions for the whole, and the whole is not a singular identity ever.
Yeah. Where was I? Okay, so seeing that that representation is important to open discussion and to have more and to give voices to those who don't necessarily have a voice.
Yeah, just like diverse groups of people all like need different things, and I think that the more diversity within kind of leadership roles, the more likely they are to like be able to kind of accommodate the more amounts of groups of people, I guess.
So seeing that, the next question would be, how important are role models in politics then? A more representation of gender, for example, more representation of gender and sexual orientation in politics might help even adults reconsider previous prejudices and redefine gender and sex in society. So, do you think it would help change the way some people think about gender and sex in their society?
I think that it's hard to talk because there's like two sides to every story. So I feel like the more like sexual representation or like gender representation that's in politics, like some people are gonna really like hold that up, and some people are gonna really like benefit from that. But then there are people who will just use that as an excuse to like solidify their already like views that maybe don't line up with mine. So I feel like people who have a perspective that they don't want like gender or sexual orientation representations in their government, I think that those people like having more of that is just going to solidify their views. But then like the people who are underrepresented in government are going to be like very excited and very happy to have like role models and have people that they can look up to and identify with in the systems that like aid them or are intended to aid them. Whether or not they actually accomplish that is a different.
So basically, some people would be elevated, while others would be more would actually act more.
Yeah, like I just think that when you look at like protesters, and when you look at like protesters who are protesting what is currently happening, and then like protesters who are protesting like the other protesters or the other activists, like you see like levels of like punishment and levels of like who's being like villainized in these like situations. So the people who are against like problematic systems of government are the people who are being criminalized in these like protesting groups. But then the people who are protesting but still are like for problematic governments, those people are maybe not being like criminalized or maybe not being like punished in the same extent.
Okay. So being that as it is, where we can agree that representation can help some and not necessarily help some, but not all.
I think that it would help everybody, but I do think that there would be like backlash if it just like it doesn't happen overnight, and it's not something that would just like instantly like unify everybody. I think that it would actually like maybe even deepen the divide that already exists.
Well, yeah, we can see how deep the divide is occurring down in the U.S., right?
Especially using America or the United States as a like reference point. I think that there's like a massive divide, and I think that split would only be like furthered through like more representation. But it is like it's an ideal.
Yeah. It's a nice ideal, but right now we're not seeing that much progress in it, right?
If anything, like it's reverse, like it's going backwards.
Yeah, we're noticing that it's going backwards, right? So, seeing that, there's something else Audre Lorde also said that actually has to do with that going backwards thing. She basically said that the way the oppressor maintains the oppressed is by making them explain their needs, so avoiding the need to educate themselves. So basically, the oppressor doesn't have to educate themselves about the problems of these people or that other people. They're like, oh, I don't know their problems, but they can solve them themselves, right? They don't have to educate themselves, and then people trying to tell him that is just more. It gives him more of a flame to say, see, they know their problems. They don't need my help. So with more representation, do you think the more representation politics, do you think is a way to take away this excuse to like not educate themselves? Like if there's more people in parliament, or if there's more people in parliament that are a representation of these other people, would it force them to try to educate themselves? Or would it actually add to their excuse? Would it actually be adding logs to the fire, basically?
I think that it kind of depends on the space of the opposition, I guess. So if there's more representation, there's naturally there's going to be people who would use that excuse of like, oh, well, now there's people who can deal with this, and so I don't need to. Especially in like political systems, like I could see maybe existing members deciding that because there's representation, like they no longer need to have an opinion on the matter, and so like then, or like maybe even would oppose opinions based on like the minority groups that are represented. But then I think that also more representation would in others maybe like just like perpetuate like kind of ally, like the space of the ally, and I think that that's something that's really important as well, that is often ignored, is like the space of allies and the space of people who are fighting for equality, who maybe like don't necessarily fit into minority groups or don't necessarily have the same like kind of like number of like tallies on their like minority group like cue card or whatever. Like I feel like, yeah, the space of the ally is something that would maybe benefit from more representation.
So the more representation, the more we can see the allies we have.
Yeah, because if there's representation, then it forces people to either like go into that category of, well, I'm with you, like we're working as like a team or as a whole in like this political system, and so like that forces people to kind of like ally with the minority groups that are represented. In the like hypothetical that more representation did just happen within political systems, and then also like the people who oppose are just going to be like outed, I guess, or more it's going to be blatantly obvious if they're like opposing the like introduction of minority groups or people who represent like gender or like sexuality or otherwise, or race as well, I suppose.
Yeah, I personally don't really understand politics that much. It's really hard for me to understand politics. So there's probably people who don't really understand politics, but they've heard others who do in a way. Mm-hmm. That would also kind of help persuade them into one political spectrum, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like my understanding of politics is like maybe like a minimal working understanding, but I also think that there's so much to learn, and it's like constantly evolving because political events happen on the daily, So it's definitely one of those things that a lot of people just don't take the time, myself included, take the time to keep on top of, or like maybe necessarily just like stay informed.
Well, yeah, staying informed is important because you want to know how your country's gonna be run, right?
But it's easy as like for me as like a Caucasian like middle class male, like it's easy to just be like, oh, like nothing's gonna change, like nothing will ever like really impact me in like that extreme of a way. So it's easy to kind of like brush it off, or like you like don't vote because it doesn't, like your vote doesn't matter, or like whatever justification you use. I feel like it's easy to do, and I feel like lots of people do it. So it's not, I don't know. I think that politics is a really strange thing, and it's a like strange thing that we like talk about and are supposed to have opinions on, but then like you're not really supposed to talk about it, and you're not really supposed to voice your opinions. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really hard to actually discuss your opinions, your political opinions openly when you don't when you have a limitation on your understanding of those policies,
Exactly.
of those policies, right? So we're gonna be moving on. This is this is actually a good interview, by the way. You're more direct with your questions, which I like. So this is going a little bit faster than the other interviews that I had. So yeah, I thank you for that. So we're gonna be moving on to media.
Okay.
And this is representation in general in media. This includes YouTube and TV, film, music, radio, newspaper, all media. I don't know who does newspaper these days.
Just like print media.
Yeah, print media. So we're gonna be visiting Judith Butler again, and she uses in her performative essay, she uses a lot of theatrical lingo as a metaphor for explaining her point of view. So what she says that gender in non-theatrical performance is more scrutinized than that of a gender in theater. Mm-hmm. So basically, transgender in theater won't have the same backlash that one in real life, and she explains that the reason for this is that in theater when they say this is just an act, it derealizes the act, and one keeps their reality in this temporary challenge of their prejudice in gender and sexuality and whatnot. So basically, we keep our own reality inside this fake world, this not real world. So what we see in theater, we might find it funny because it doesn't because it doesn't challenge our reality. We're considering it as fake. It's just play. But the moment we see the same character in real life, it backlashes with our prejudice, and we immediately react in often violent ways. If you're not okay with that. But the question is this true of all media? What about the normalization of gender and sex in TV and film, or more gay characters in a TV show, or more female characters in TV and film? What about music and radio? Do they have the same impact?
Is the question specifically regarding music and radio?
No, you can take them as different questions of the same topic.
I do think that it's maybe important to point out that in the Judith Butler text, I think that she uses the term transvestite when she's referring to like the performer on stage and in the street.
You're right. She's using transvestite.
So because transvestite is an outdated term, which is like definitely considered hate speech.
Well, these essays
but it's
from
time.
the
So it's a different.
It's a
era.
different time.
But I do think that like just to acknowledge that the translation of like changing that term to transgender, I think is maybe not the best representation of what she's actually speaking of, because like a transgendered individual isn't a performer. So to refer to somebody who happens to be transgender as like an onstage presence, I think maybe like defeats the purpose of what Butler was saying, and I think that it's more of like a cross-dresser space, rather, which would be like a more politically correct term for somebody who just like dresses in the gender that is not their own. Because to like refer to somebody like transgender stage performers would be they are women. They are either women or men. But like to refer to them as otherwise in the street is, I think like I think that
you're right. I wanna apologize for that.
It's just
yeah.
It's just hard when you're reading something that's from a different time, so you're trying to censor it and filter it into something that is like a politically correct way. But I do think that what she means is like the space of the cross-dresser, so the space of somebody who dresses in a gender that is not their own. Which is not. Yeah.
Well, I took a little bit of liberty here. I used the term transgender because it's true they are women or male. The transgender is just they identify with a gender that it's not their biological gender. They're like they feel trapped, so they're a woman and they're a man. But a lot of people don't distinguish the two.
Yeah.
So that's why I was referring to them in a theatrical, because it's not necessarily that it's the spectrum of the cross-dresser or the spectrum of the woman or male. Is the spectator is the point of view of the spectator that he has an opinion about those, an opinion about a strong opinion about that person, and if somebody acts in a way, in either transgender or transvestite, in a comedy, for example, in theater, that the person will laugh at it and find it funny because it doesn't challenge their prejudice. It doesn't challenge their point of view. But if the same character acting the same way happens to be seen in real life, the spectator all of a sudden feels threatened because it feels like it's his point of view is being challenged.
I think a good reference to read like in tandem is the bell hooks reading from the course material is Paris Burning, when Hooks talks about like Eddie Murphy as like a drag performer. So Eddie Murphy performing drag is like comedic and it doesn't challenge like racial stereotypes or gender stereotypes. But then if you look at like the individuals in the film Paris is Burning, those people challenge like the comedic value of like transgendered or drag presenting bodies, and I feel like that is like a contemporary take on what Butler is talking about in the stage versus the street. I think they're both getting at the same point. So the bell hooks is like the stage versus the street. So it's the stage is Eddie Murphy and the street is these like the youth in the film Paris is Burning, and I think that it's the same draw from the Butler text. It's just in a more contemporary take because it was written in the 90s and the 80s, and terminology has changed between the 80s and the 90s, and then the 90s and now it's changed, but not as much. I think maybe it's just like a good way.
Yeah, you're right. So seeing that, I'm gonna rephrase that question a little bit.
I do, like, I still understand the question, and
Yeah.
I feel like representation in media is something that is, like, evolving constantly, and I think that it's something that is, it's amazing because now, in, like, this contemporary digital age, there is so much representation, and there is so much production being made of, like, because anybody can have a YouTube channel now.
Yeah.
Anybody with a smartphone and a computer or access to the internet
Yeah.
and a camera can have a YouTube channel. Anybody who has access can put things out there, can produce. They can produce like music or videos or films or like vlogs or whatever. So I feel like media production is something that's really amazing because its access is minimally limited in like contemporary times. And so you see people like YouTube, like so many of the top like beauty bloggers on YouTube who do makeup and like promote companies and whatever are men. Like there's lots of like gay and like non-binary men who are like top like super huge payouts like YouTubers who just like do makeup on YouTube. And that's like all around the world, like throughout Europe and North America as well. And there's these people who are like hyper famous just based on like these YouTube followings. And I think that like that acceptance and like there's like super famous and super well off transgender women who like represent themselves on YouTube just through like beauty blogging or like TV, like in like popular culture, like RuPaul's Drag Race is on Netflix, so it's accessible to like virtually anybody in North America who has a Netflix account or access to a Netflix account, as well as like just having an LGBT section on Netflix where there's like films and things that maybe you wouldn't be exposed to, or having like channels on TV that are like pander or have like representation of people who are different, or shows that like only feature women, like show like breakfast television type of things, like where you just like it's just like women talking amongst themselves about current events, and like having things like from the 90s, like where like Oprah Winfrey had her own show, Rosie O'Donnell had her own show, like these like there's like representation of like women of color, or like a lesbian who has her own show and is like, or Ellen, I guess even now as well, is like something that I feel like is just more and more and more, and it's like snowballing, and it's amazing because media is something that access is like pretty much limitless at this point, with the exception of countries, of course, that have like strong censorship laws.
Yeah. So you think television and all these shows have actual positive impact?
Yeah, because it's representation. Like I remember like being like a queer individual and like being like a child who maybe didn't fully understand like what queerness meant, or like alternate sexuality meant, like seeing issues like on TV, or like having access to things that like people who were my age 10, 20 years ago didn't have access to. Like when I was going through middle school, like I had access to like Out TV, which is a Canadian TV channel that deals with like gay and lesbian like, television.
I wish I had that.
Yeah, and like, or just like watching like MTV and like their like you watch like The Real World, or like One Girl, Five Gays is something that I don't think exists anymore, but was like huge when I was in high school, which is just like representation of other like sexualities and things that I could identify with, whereas like people who even just 10 years before me, like what they could identify with was limited, and like access wasn't guaranteed, and then also like coming of age in a time where like when I was a child, like we were on like VHSs and like dial-up internet, to the point where like when I graduated high school, I had my own laptop and a cell phone that had internet access, and even if I like maybe didn't want to access something at home, like I could go to any Starbucks and use the Wi-Fi. or had Wi-Fi at school and things like that. So like access was something that like kind of really like unfolded through my like coming of age, and like the internet is like a vast resource that kind of also I would say counts as media, and it's like you can identify as anything that you want on the internet, even if it's like morally questionable. Like there's a community for you.
So it's impactful with representation and whatnot. But do you think this impact also helps other people who not necessarily identify with being gay or being transgender or these community groups, but do you think it actually helps change their point of view to the better?
Yeah, because I think that people of any minority group can find things that they identify with. So I can only really speak to like queer issues that I personally identify with, that I found help me in like queer representation in media. But at the same time, like if your representation is like as a person of color or as an immigrant or as otherwise, like as like a female in like a male-dominated sphere, like you can find representation in some form in virtually anything. Like you can find like female lawyers or like whatever. Like I'm sure there's a Facebook group for it. Like there's like, and like Facebook is a part of media. Like it's things like there's something for everyone, or like a person of color who wants to maybe enter like police force. Like there's like resources and there's representation and there's like things that you like didn't necessarily see even like 20-30 years ago, like when like if there's a black person in a horror film, they have to die first, and like now that's not something that necessarily is
true,
is not necessarily true, and there's like tropes that we don't have to follow anymore because media is so accessible, and if you don't like something, you just don't have to subscribe to it.
Yes. What about music? Does it have the same impact?
I think that personally, music is something that I'm not like it's not something that really like dictates my life, just because it's not an interest of mine necessarily to the extent that it is others, and I get that a lot of people really like live their life based on the music that they listen to. But I think from what I know of music, I think that representation is something that's like relatively, like it's an industry where like women have to deal with like a lot of hardships, and I think that also like a lot of kind of current events kind of point to that. But also it's an industry where women can like be at the top, like where women like maybe even like higher than men in some cases. Like if you look at pop music, like male representation is like virtually non-existent. So it kind of depends, but then like you look at hip hop and it's the type of woman who succeeds is like a specific type of woman, which is like maybe pandering towards male interest. But also there's like lots of women who identify with that, so it's not necessarily a negative. But it kind of, I feel like it changes based on genre, and and I think that a lot of the women who work in music have a lot of the same stories. It's just like women who work in media and like film have a lot of the same stories of like boundaries being crossed by people who are above them because they can. And I think that now like accountability is like a huge conversation, and I think that contemporarily it's really relevant. But I wouldn't say that I know enough about music to speak like concretely on like representation in music.
Look, that's fair. So, moving on to the next question. Mm-hmm. I recently pulled a online article. This is an online article by B.G. Carter.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who he is. I haven't checked any background on him, so I don't know how believable his word is. Right?
Where is it published?
It's Maintaining an Eye or something like that.
It's just like a website.
It's a general news website. It's a not general news. What do you call entertainment news website? So in this article, this article was discussing about cancellation of cartoon shows in specifically Young Justice, and he was saying that a major decision for cartoon content are the toys, and apparently that also determines the gender of the demographic they're trying to sell to, where girls don't buy as much toys as boys do. So most shows get cancelled when the majority of views are girls. Like, it doesn't matter how good how many views or how many people are seeing the show. If the majority are girls, it's gonna get cancelled. Apparently because of this reason. So, first question: first of all, how true do you think this term is? Like, how true do you think this statement is? Is there any evidence or not? And the other thing is, why is there a reason why toys have to be gender locked? And how to interacting with these toys do you think affect gender construction?
I feel like when I think about toys, and like the production of toys, I think about like as when you look at toys from like ages. So baby toys are often quite unisex. So when they're like for very small to like toddlers, like it's quite unisex. And then there's like the gender division of like girls start to play with dolls and boys start to play with trucks or superheroes or whatever, and like whatever those like divisions are. And when you look at like the progression of toys with the ages and like advertising in toys, there are like some exceptions, of course. Like there's Lego that is targeted towards girls, but like I think that the age spectrum for boys' toys goes a lot further, whereas like the age spectrum for girls' toys like kind of caps off at like easy bake ovens. And even then, it's like easy bake ovens and like make cupcakes for your friends. And then there's like a little like Play-Doh kit where you're like doing makeup and hair. Whereas like the boys' toys, like they get up to Play-Doh kits, so they get to make like bugs out of Play-Doh. But then they also get like Kinects and Lego and like Bionicles and like things like and like superheroes, and like it kind of like even like toys never really end for men, like boys to men. Like it's like you evolve with it and you're into superheroes, but then you're into Star Wars, and like Star Wars Lego is something that's for all ages. Or like you move into like muscle cars or motorcycles, or like you're really into helicopters, or you're really into like gas powered remote control vehicles. And like that doesn't end for men, but I think that with like girls, like I can't think of anything past like an easy bake oven, and then they're supposed to start buying clothes and makeup, and or like toys that are referenced to clothes and makeup with like small children, like 4, 5, 6, like dress up, and like makeup kits for like children where it's like your like little set of like 4 lip glosses or whatever, and like I think that. Also looking at children and like young girls, I think that what is acceptable is even like going younger and younger and younger, whereas like it wasn't until middle school that girls started wearing like mascara when I was a child, but now like you see it in like grade like 4, 5, 6 classes where like girls start wearing mascara, or girls start wearing like a little bit of lipstick or blush or whatever, like get into like products that aren't necessarily something that was like applicable to like young children, even just like my generation, like one generation before theirs, is something that's like new and terrifying. And I think that like the gender division, I do see how that could check out, because like I think that the emphasis of growing up is something that is really put on the female gender, and really like drilled into them, is that they need to grow up, they need to mature, they need to like want to have children, they need to do that. And then like also just like the sexualization of like young women versus or young women and like children even, versus like that of boys. Like boys aren't expected to become like sexual beings until they're like 18, whereas girls, as soon as like their period starts, they're women, which is like often like 12, 13. But like, yeah, like I feel like the like expectations of gender is very different, and like men are like never necessarily expected to grow up, and even like when they are, like in like media, you see it in like romantic comedies where like, oh, like he's just a boy, like he's just like, it's just like a man child or whatever. But like women are never, or very rarely, painted as immature. I think that women are often expected to be like more mature sex. And so I do feel like that is something that would make sense if I think about it critically, of like who is being targeted by like toy companies, by children's television or children's media. Like I feel like I'm not surprised by that, because what they're selling to young girls and what they're selling to young boys is very different. And like there's a lot more money in makeup than there is in action figures.
That is true. But do you think that well, yeah, it does affect gender construction in a way?
Yeah, because like men are not expected to like men are less expected to participate in beauty standards than women are.
But is this divide in toys and demographic okay?
No, it's like completely unnecessary. Yeah, it's completely unnecessary, but it's I don't really understand it. I feel like it's one of those things that it just like is, and you just kind of accept it because it just is, and that's how it has been and how it continues to be. But it's not something that necessarily makes sense, and when you think about it critically, like it doesn't make any sense, because like the division is so mundane of like what the interests are. And like if you were to take a show that is pandered towards girls, and just like change the colors or change like the animation style but keep the storyline, it would be the exact same but just like targeted towards boys. Like it's like Lego sets that are targeted towards girls, like the only indicator that it's targeted towards girls is that it's like pink and purple. So like if you were to take that same children's Lego set that has like dragons and fairies and a castle, and change it so that instead of like a purple castle, it's a gray castle, and instead of like the dragon being pink, it's like black and green, and instead of like the fairy, I don't know, being like in like a purple glittery dress, it's in like something, I don't know, like with cleavage, then it's like instantly for boys. Like it doesn't really, like the division is like so mundane, with the exception I guess of like dolls, but even dolls, like it's just like G.I. Joe versus Barbie, and like what really, aside from like what they do, like aside from their job, like what is truly the difference? Like Barbie's a doctor or a nurse or whatever, and G.I. Joe is just like in the military. Like they don't really.
There shouldn't be a difference.
Yeah, I think it's really unnecessary, but I also think that there's like a huge wave of parents who are, well, like my generation generation that is kind of entering parenthood, and are making conscious choices to like give children non-gendered names and like make sure that children are comfortable choosing whatever their interests are. Because like I babysit a little girl and she's like very uninterested in anything remotely feminine, but it's still at an age where you like don't necessarily need to have a conversation about sexuality or gender, because she's still happy self-identifying as female, but she is like only interested in ninjas and like Lego and Pokemon,
yeah,
which are things that are like targeted towards boys, like generally.
Yeah, like my sister, when we were young, my sister, my mom would buy her Barbies, but my sister would not play with the Barbies. She would actually take the dresses and put it into her dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
She would actually play with dinosaurs. And my mom just gave up with the Barbie thing. She was like, okay, I can't. She doesn't like Barbie. And later on in life, my sister's like, she identifies as female. She's like, I'm a female. It's just I don't like girly stuff. I know how to put makeup, but I don't necessarily do it every day.
Mm-hmm.
I just do it in special occasions. And so why there's this like pragmatic, is it that the word, pragmatic thing, where a girl playing with boy toys, and it's more like, oh, she's a tomboy and whatnot. But the moment the boy plays with a Barbie, for example, it becomes like this huge explosion of, oh no, don't play with Barbies, you're a boy, you're supposed to play with G.I. Joes.
Yeah, I think that it maybe depends on like where you're coming from and like what your context is, because like I had the opposite experience of your sister, where I had an older sister and she was like so much older than me that her toys were not something that she was necessarily interested in when I was growing up and into toys. So like I would play with her Barbies all the time, and I would build houses out of Lego, whereas like other like little boys like build cars. And like I was interested in things for different reasons, or like every time we'd go through like a McDonald's drive-through, I would always want the girls' toy, because like going through the drive-through, they don't make an assumption based on like what you look like, and so I just feel like it depends on like where you're coming from. And I think that I definitely came from a place of privilege where my parents were pretty liberal on like gender construct with like toys and entertainment. But I also think that there's a lot of people who don't necessarily, or I know that there's a lot of people who don't have that liberty of being allowed the freedom to choose what their interests are, regardless of gender.
Fair enough. The next question, we're going to be revisiting the first of this section, about the impact of television and radio. Well, not music in this time, but the impact of television, cartoons in general. We're going to be revisiting that, and we're going to be asking, what about the recent cartoons such as Steven Universe, Star vs. the Forces of Evil, and other such cartoons where they challenge tropes and archetypes regarding gender role, and basically redefining what being a boy or being a girl means, to the level of comprehension of a child. So they make it easy. They make it super obvious. They make the archetype super obvious, to make it so that a child can understand the breaking of this gender role.
Mm-hmm.
Are these positive role models?
I can't necessarily speak to like contemporary cartoons because it's not something that I have like kept in my kind of like Rolodex of references. It's not something that I've watched. But I feel like when I think of like kind of cartoons that like maybe predated and also were kind of booming when I was young and like still watching cartoons, I feel like there's lots of representation that is like maybe overlooked throughout history. Like if you look at like Bugs Bunny, for example, which is like way before I was ever even a thought. Like there's tons of representation of like Bugs Bunny is like a huge crossdresser and like always like impersonates women to like partially for comedy, but also partially like there's like a sex sells kind of thing that they use as like a trope. Yeah, and I feel like that kind of is something that's funny to look at, or like Rugrats is something that I grew up with, and then looking back as an adult and seeing references to things that are maybe necessarily like pretty big topics to bring up in a cartoon that was like coming out in the early 90s. Yeah, like some of the topics that they come up with, like there's like I've seen things on the internet of like one of the babies saying like boys can wear dresses, or like references to like, oh, like I'm gonna be this like toy's dad, and then like another character saying like, oh, like we could both be its dad, and like things like that, which are like very big topics that are being delivered to kids, like maybe subconsciously, because it's not necessarily something that they instantly would catch on to, but they definitely like see it and they understand it. Yeah, I don't necessarily know, I don't think I know enough about like something like Steven Universe. Like I know of its existence, but I haven't seen any of it, so I can't really speak to like how they are doing representation.
Well, a lot of people I've interviewed, half of them don't, including you, haven't seen the show actually. Mm-hmm. But those who have seen it, the thing they like is they mostly like the representation of the woman, because the females in Steven's life, the aliens basically are all females.
Is this all the gem thing? Oh,
yeah,
the gems.
The gems thing. Yeah.
So I've seen the characters, and I've seen like images. Like I've seen images on the internet,
yeah.
But I don't have any context of like actual action of the show.
So
I feel like a lot of them are quite non-binary looking.
Yeah.
Like they don't necessarily have like gender signifiers.
Yeah.
So I don't think I realized that all of them were female.
Yeah, that's part of it. But what I like, and this is the example that actually got me into watching more of more critically to Steven Universe, is there's this one episode where there's a talent show, and Steven wants his friend, who she's an older female character. She's a teenager, mm-hmm. To compete in this talent show, because he believes she sings beautifully, right? Mm-hmm. But then the mother gets involved, and the mother starts to like try to make her wear dresses and be more feminine about it and more glamorous. It becomes this big thing, and she doesn't feel comfortable, so she doesn't want to show. So Steven Universe gets the idea, I'll take your place. And he cross-dressed and goes out and starts singing. And this is the part where I actually thought it was interesting. The reaction of the people, instead of saying, oh, why is he doing that? Instead of having a reaction at all, they said, oh, that's so Steven. And they normalized that behavior. Mm-hmm. Like they're saying, it's okay if he wears a dress. So I found that in a children's cartoon really impactful, because a lot of times, especially in some cartoons from the 90s and from the 80s, being dressed as the opposite gender was often a way to make the character miserable. Like in some cartoons, they made them lose a bet or something, they had to dress up as a woman, and they made them a huge deal of being miserable, right? But in this one, it was really normalized. It was like, it's just one more thing about his behavior. It doesn't mean anything. So I thought that was impressive.
Yeah, I feel like it's hard when it's because it's like a children's show, so like they're saying like, oh, that's so Steven, but then like if that is in like reality, like if like a child maybe expresses like gender in a different way, and you just go like, oh, like that's so like so and so, like that's so them. Like I feel like it maybe doesn't necessarily like acknowledge the importance of like gender expression and the importance that that has as you progress your life. But I do think that it is like it's good that it's being shown in like children's media, and it's something that is like being made acceptable, so that maybe like a child who is experiencing those thoughts or those feelings won't be like so scared or so cautious to like express that. So I feel like there's like it's kind of like one of those things that's maybe impossible to have like a perfect solution to, but I do think that it's a positive representation, especially if it's something because it's on like television, like it's accessible.
Yeah. So that's the last question for that section, and now we're gonna do the very last question, which is to close up the interview. What are your hopes for the future? Like seeing everything we just discussed about media, about politics, what's your hopes for the future?
I feel like if everything kind of like follows media, where like accessibility is like super important and like super normal, I think that that is something that would be like a really positive change. And I think a lot of it, especially in like politics and education, like there's not necessarily a lot of accessibility, and what is available is filtered. And I think that like both education and politics would like greatly benefit from like mass access, just like I think that media has really benefited in the way that like production of celebrity and production of entertainment in whatever format it takes is something that everybody can do now. Like anybody can make a website and sell their book. Anybody can like have a like make videos or make films or like kind of like make themselves famous or sing on the internet or like post their songs. So I just feel like kind of accessibility is maybe the new frontier, and like open access to education in the way that like so many people are denied access to post-secondary or even like mandatory learning in North America or in, I guess, Canada and the United States is all that I can really speak to. Yeah, I think that like open access and like access to knowledge and access to like political systems access, I think access is really something that like benefits, because if there's access, then people of all demographics can get in on it if they are so inclined.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Patrick, for your time. It was really. I'm trying to think of the word I forgot.
It's okay.
But yeah, thank you for your time. Okay.